if we look at Donald Trump's 100-day already, now there's no surprise that Trump has consolidated extraordinary power in this office. And also, he dismantled large portion of the federal government. On top of all that, he also has undone the military and economic alliances that were formed following World War II. Putting everything together, Donald Trump seems to be what we called a disruptor or interrupter for the globalization. But meanwhile, when we are seeing the trade war between US and China, and also from US to many other countries around the world, something doesn't quite add up. How should we understand that? From the economic and also from the political standpoint, some worry that this will only isolate the US. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Mr. Joseph Liu. Joseph Liu is the Tai Kan Kee Chair in Comparative and International Politics at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University. Well, Mr. Liu, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Hi, Will. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, Mr. Liu, as I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled, Trump Sees Trade as a Form of Tribute That Will Only Isolate the U.S. Now, Mr. Liu, I want to get this started with our first question. As we mentioned before, the last thing we need today is total isolation, politically or economically. Now, when we're looking at the Donald Trump's ambition from this political and also this economic standpoint, how do we understand the progress and how much do we believe that Donald Trump is actually aiming to unify the world instead of tearing it apart? Your thoughts?
Okay, thanks, Will. The first thing I will say is that while some people think that the Trump administration is an isolationist administration, I don't think so. And I think the evidence thus far bears it out. Yeah. Of course, the Trump administration and President Trump himself wants to conduct foreign policy in very different ways and for very different ends. Yeah, that much is clear. But that's very different from saying that the Trump administration is isolationist. I think if you look at the positions it's taking on the Ukraine war, on Gaza, on international trade, I think it's definitely not isolationist, right? But it's very different. So that's the first thing. The second thing we need to understand is while in the international affairs today, we are looking at a situation where there is intensifying great power rivalry between the United States and China. And of course, many people have argued and made the point that historically we have seen, rising powers competing with so-called status quo powers before, right? And the Thucydides trap argument by Graham Allison outlines very clearly quite a number of these instances in history. But I would suggest that today there's a slight difference because historically we look at a status quo power and a rising power. But today, both great powers are, in a sense, non-status quo powers. They are both dissatisfied with the status quo, right? Trump is dissatisfied with the status quo because, he keeps saying that the US has been taken advantage of by everyone, especially friends and allies, and he needs to fix that. So he's very dissatisfied with that. In the case of China, in the case of Xi Jinping, and in fact, even before Xi Jinping came to power, China was not very satisfied at how its emergence and its rise was accommodated or being blocked by the prevailing US-led order, right? So in the case of China, there is a degree of dissatisfaction with the status quo as well. So what you have now is great power rivalry with both powers to some degree or other dissatisfied. Yeah. So there's a little bit of difference there, and how that plays out, I think, will be critical. And the third thing, just to finish answering your question, is that Trump is very much set on his domestic agenda. Yeah, which is a populist agenda. One thing you must give Trump credit for is that he takes his campaign promises very seriously. Yeah, and in democratic politics, that is a very tall order. I mean, we've seen very much, very often, politicians, when they are in the heat of the hustings and campaign battles, they make all sorts of promises. But then when they come to power, all sorts of obstacles, they start to walk back on promises. Trump wants to take his campaign promises very seriously. Yeah, so he does, and he's prepared to do very radical, out of the box things. Now, the question is the impact of that, as you rightly pointed out, on the global order, on global stability. And we see that with the trade tariffs. Yeah, I think he has pushed hard. My own view is that he has pushed too far, and it is not only compromising global economic stability, it's also undermining, I believe, the interests of the American public. We do not see it yet, but over the next few months and years, I think we will see it. And this is why Republican congressmen who are staring at the prospect of midterm elections, they are getting very worried, because they know that the pain is going to kick in the build-up to their re-election efforts in slightly less than 2 years' time. Yeah, so they are worried, and that's a very useful litmus test, I think, in terms of what is in store for the domestic American public.
Mr. Liu, speaking of pushing the agenda too far, let's talk about the global trading system. Again, as portion of your article neatly pointed out, that under Donald Trump, or regardless who's the leader in the White House, trading system must be well positioned and also must be highly valued. And some argue that because of the trading system or this loopholes under Donald Trump at this moment, we're looking at this stock market fluctuations. People are also concerned about the US bond market, fears of the recession, and also even there's a speculation about how different countries can or will negotiate with Donald Trump under the condition of the trade war or the tariff war. So, Mr. Liu, from your perspective, very simple question. Do you think that today, when we look at the global trading system, it's already broken or it is too late to fix? Without mentioning China, I believe, again, based on my personal observation, the trade war has not been advantageous to any of the countries. And as a matter of fact, is pushing the underdeveloped countries to the brink or even to the cliff of the war. So what do you think of that?
That's a very interesting observation. I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can. So I think there are serious problems with the global trading system. And to be fair, I think in terms of the narrative that is coming out of the Trump administration, there is some truth to that, right? In terms of the imbalance and the sort of, I suppose you could call it, vulnerability of the United States. But we need to look at trade in its entirety, right? And to look at it strategically as well, right? So I'll say a few things about that. First is, of course, one of the fundamental principles that have enabled global trade and that has enhanced global trade is quite simply comparative advantage, right? The fact that you can produce goods cheaper elsewhere and ship them in rather than producing it in your own sort of domain, right? And countries have taken advantage of that, and consumers have benefited from that, right? American consumers are very, very taken by Chinese manufactured products, right? We all know that, right? Walmart, Target, you name it. So that is the first point. The second point is Trump, of course, has a very narrow view of trade imbalance and tariffs. He's looking only at goods, right? He's not looking at services. He's not looking at capital. He's not even looking at human talent, for example. Yeah, various other aspects that feed into the global economic system. He's looking very narrowly at trade trade imbalances. Yeah, and I think that if you focus on that, you get a particular picture, but it's a distorted picture. It's a distorted picture of where the United States stands in the global economy, right? But if you remain obsessed with that particular piece of the puzzle, and you take very harsh action, as Trump has done with basically effectively it's global tariffs, right? I think the number of countries that are spared, Russia, Cuba, but they have other sanctions to deal with, right? But so effectively is you're tariffing the whole world. It's going to have a spillover effect on all these other aspects of American global power, and that spillover effect will be somewhat negative because people will start to be concerned and start to think twice about the reliability of the US, the stability of the US economy and of policy making. Yeah, so I think that by focusing on just one piece of the puzzle, what the administration risks doing is to amplify a problem that was not there, right? It will amplify in a way that might actually undermine itself and its own interests in terms of having the levers to pursue their interests in global affairs.
Mr. Liu, in your article, when you talk about or wrote about the trade war, and this is something that you wrote, and I quote, "Not everyone is playing ball. China has pushed back hard." And we know that we're looking at two largest economies in the world are competing against each other. And this is definitely, it brings detrimental effects upon the nations and of course upon the citizens. But another piece of reality is recently the Chinese leader quickly wrapped up a trip to three countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. And according to the report, and China, and I quote, firmly opposes any party reaching a deal at the expenses of China's interest, adding that China would resolutely take countermeasures, end quote. So, Mr. Liu, from your perspective, how clear and how loud is the message to the US? And we know that Vietnam is one of the crucial trading partner with the US and also on the list from Donald Trump's trade war, and Cambodia as well. So quickly wrap up the trip for China. How much did the US can understand the messages that China sent to those countries, and what does that bring to the US to the table at this moment?
Actually, you hit on a very important point, and it's a point that is going to be debated and it's going to cause some concern for regional countries. Yeah, because the United States and China are great powers, right? The largest and second largest economy in the world, and with political, with military, with diplomatic power accompanying it. Great powers will think like great powers. And the way they think will be very different from smaller powers. And in many respects, small powers are not as relevant to them, and it's not as immediately relevant to them in their great power competition. So the reason why I raise that is because, as you and your listeners know, countries in Southeast Asia, we've made very clear that as far as we're concerned, we really don't want to be in a position where we are caught between the US and China, right? We don't believe in a binary approach. We don't believe that it is conducive for stability or for the interest of anyone, including the two powers themselves. Yeah, that has always been our position. Now, the problem now is if you look at the rhetoric from both the US and China, it is quite alarming. Right? For us as a small country caught in the middle. The Americans are saying that they want to use their leverage on these smaller economies to pressure China on trade. Yeah, and we all know that as far as the US is concerned, their number one target when it comes to trade is China. Yeah, Trump has made that very clear. On the Chinese part, as you quoted just now, they are now saying that they don't want anyone to be on board with the United States to strike a deal that will disadvantage China. Yeah. So that message, I may disagree with you a little bit there, in the sense that the message is not primarily for the United States. Yeah. Of course, they want the US to pick up on that, but just as much it is for other countries, that you guys, because China knows that as a result of what Trump has done, a lot of countries are queuing up to discuss ways to reduce the tariffs that the United States wants to impose on them, right? China also knows that the US and President Trump has made it very clear that they want to use trade relations with these other countries to direct it towards the larger challenge of China. Yeah? And of course, that works against the interests of China. So the Chinese are very clear that they too feel a need to draw the line and to sound out the warning. And that causes a lot of problems for the smaller countries, right? Because the United States is basically saying you better be careful about working too close with China, and the Chinese are saying you better be careful about working too close with the United States. We don't want to be in this situation, but increasingly the talk from both China and the US seems to converge on that point. Yeah, which I think it is a cause for concern, and also just to add that in Southeast Asia, as you and your listeners know, ASEAN over the last, I think since 2021, 2022, has overtaken the United States and the EU to become China's largest trading partner. Yeah, so that trade and economic relationship between China and ASEAN is very critical for both parties. And of course, as far as Southeast Asian states are concerned, we want that relationship to continue. But what we don't want, and what we hope will not happen, is that relationship gets dragged into the superpower competition between the Chinese and the Americans. Yeah, that would be a very it would put us in a very difficult situation.
Mr. Liu, I know you're on a very tight schedule. I got to ask one more question before letting you go. Now, sure. I want to ask about this ongoing tension between US and Iran. Now, the news report came out that, if I'm not mistaken, the delegates from Iran are actually coming to Beijing this week to meet Chinese officials to discuss economic partnership or perhaps the economic blueprint. But meanwhile, US delegates and also the Iranian delegates have met previously for the 2 weekends. And we know that Iran is very much interested in being partnership with China, but also US is paying attention. So from your perspective, from the global trade perspective, from this political interest, what is your assessment that China's role in the US and Iran denuclearization deal? Do you think that this could be a bargaining chip for China to reduce the tension with the US when we talk about Iran? Your final thoughts.
I think that the Chinese will be a bit careful about getting too deeply involved in the situation in the Middle East. I mean, we know that China played some kind of role in the sort of stabilization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But the fact of the matter is, China is, relatively speaking, a newer actor in the region, whereas the United States has been quite deeply embedded in the region for a very long time. Yeah. So I think the Chinese will be very careful. And the Chinese also know that as far as the US and by extension Israel is concerned, the stakes in regards to Iran are very high. Yeah, because it's not just a question of trade imbalances there. It's a question of nuclear capability, nuclear weapons ambitions of Iran, right? The concern for Israel and by extension the concern for the United States. Now this is, and it's also a very difficult situation to resolve. I mean, we are all very thankful that there was a relatively good start to discussions in Oman about a week or so ago, but it's a long road ahead. And I think China will have to weigh very carefully if they want to be a proactive player in this scene. I suspect that the Chinese will entertain the Iranians. Yeah, will be interested to explore economic opportunities, but of course mindful of the sanctions regime that is on them, because you are already in this difficult situation with the US. And I mean, fact of the matter is the Chinese economy also has its own challenges, right, which we haven't talked about. So China wants to be careful about taking actions that would inadvertently deepen the problems, the economic problems that they have with the United States. Yeah, so they will listen to the Iranians, but I don't expect China to be too proactive in getting involved.
Well, again, Mr. Liu, thank you so much for your insights. And again, Mr. Joseph Liu is the Tai Kan Key Chair in Comparative and International Politics at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to connect with Mr. Liu and check out this amazing article, which is entitled "Trump Sees Trade as a Form of Tribute, a tribute that will only isolate the U.S." Well, Mr. Liu, thank you so much for your time and love to have you back on the show for our future episodes.
Thank you, Will. Would love to come back.